Check, check, sibilance. Hello. So I'm Jonny Dubowsky, and I'm from New York City. I live in Connecticut now, but I lived there for like 25, 30 years. And I had a band called Johnny Lives that was coming up in like the late 90s in New York. We used to tour with like the Strokes and the Killers, and went on tour with Meatloaf and Blondie and all of these huge like kind of classic rock acts. We toured with Everclear for 2 years, did like 60 shows with them, run like Late Night with Conan O'Brien and CBS Early Show, and we had a good, solid music industry run back in the time when they gave $800,000 record deals. I didn't take a publishing deal, so I actually make money off of publishing still to this day, because I had a couple songs in like in a few movies like The Rocker and Van Wilder 2, the cinematic tour de force. Dumb college movies is kind of our pocket. But I certainly don't make as much money as I would like to. My brother is actually a Grammy Award-winning producer out of Australia. He just like produced the Flom record that got Best Electronic Record. And even he doesn't make as much money as he would like to. And the fact that someone can win a Grammy this year and still be talking to me about how he can see the revenue slipping between his fingers. He knows that there's a lot of money being made, but it's hard to collect it. He is making an excellent living as a producer, but imagine if your income's 30, 40% variable, and the points by which it's variable are hard to pin down. You get a lot of hazy books, and the recording of revenue flow is not great. And so my personal background, apart from music, is also as a cyberneticist, and I studied complex adaptive systems and now teach in a think tank, and I work for a hedge fund that's focused on natural capital. So I'm totally two different worlds. I do blockchain coding and architecture. I got into blockchain in 2013 when I started mining Bitcoin like in my closet in Hawaii, and got in early on Dash when it was Darkcoin, and was in the Ethereum ICO and Factum. So I'm really ferociously, swallow this stuff. I got to sit in on some of the Casper talks because I worked for Scenario a little bit as a contractor and helping with marketing, and I'm good at taking complex concepts and translating them for human beings. That's what I do as a cyberneticist, is take really complex, abstract computational systems, and I'm the guy who helps put them out into the world. So I run a lot of venture programs out of NYU and some of the New York City maker spaces like iBeam and NYU's ITP are places that I love to play. That's where a lot of inspiration is coming in creative coding. So I have weird bits of information about all these different sectors, and I had a nonprofit called Rock and Renew, which is the model for what I'd like to do with musicians with the blockchain. But we've done Rock and Renew for 12 years with all of those bands I mentioned, like Debbie Harry and Art from Everclear. We would do educational programs for kids on the environment, because we felt, and it wasn't just me, it was like a huge coalition of scientists and activists, and we felt that the environmental message wasn't getting through, and that musicians were great communicators, and they had a great way of getting authentic connection with their fans. And this we started in 2006 and would take it out on tours. So doing environmental projects led me to Arduinos and Raspberry Pis, these little computers, and we started creating a sensor network. So we built a whole company. Well, here's like Rock and Renew. We would do interviews with famous artists and get them talking about very specific concepts. And we would get the concepts from places like the NRDC and the Sierra Club. And these are nonpartisan, science-driven concepts. So we weren't really rocking the boat too much on anyone's opinion about whether like growing a carrot was a good thing or not, That non-political approach has been good at getting things done, action, without talk. So we started the Sense Collective as a way to do this. I've been building these sensors, and IoT on the blockchain, as you know, is ridiculous. It's hard to do, it's expensive, and it's all new. So getting any of this done needs translation. So Sense Collective is a hub for it all, and Nexus is the main blockchain that we're building on top of, with some of the concepts that Colin has introduced with the telecommunications network and the nodes as a hub for community, and the lower level libraries and all the language stuff being a way that you don't have to know this stuff cold to see the benefits from it. And so I was even just talking to Colin at breakfast, because I haven't gotten to meet him until just today, and just wanted to make sure that this talk was aligned with the Nexus vision. It seems that everywhere I've gone with this development has been without needing to have much of a conversation, because he's following such a very specific path. And I was happy to hear that we're in alignment in the sense that musicians are so important, and it's the easiest use case to prove the viability of blockchain. That a lot of the problems of the music industry are accounting problems, and they come from a lot of places, a lot of the usual suspects. And when we had Def Leppard recording $2 million records where they would record every note of the guitar to make the chord, you know, they would spend like 18 days on guitars. Like, that was the heyday of the music industry in terms of revenue generation and then distribution of that wealth back out to the artists. And we can kind of, it's my opinion that we're looking today at sort of the bottom of optimizing the music industry. And Napster and P2P computing was the blessing and the curse. It's the cure and the poison, and it is the cure, though, on the other side of it. It's absolutely the cure. It was just stupid business practices and greed that got in the way of recognizing that at the right time. So I'm trying to introduce that and to say that the next member of every band should be a Nexus node. Sorry, this is really like not very blown up. The next member of the band should be a combination of like a Nexus node, which has full dApps loaded up onto it. And what's that? I am full screen. It's just doing some concocted stuff. Maybe I can zoom in more this way. Yeah, let's try that. That works. What's that key? Yeah, this is wonky. But I will put these. Oh, this is working. There we go. Okay, good. So. Yeah, I'm going to put this online, and I also didn't know what to expect, who would be here. So before I get too deeper in, can everybody just give like a one-liner on like your level of your name, like where you're from, if you represent a company or your interest here, and your level of understanding of like blockchain, how deeply you know the technicals, because then I can really charter the rest of this. And I'm only going to talk for like a half of this and try and turn it over to conversations pretty quickly.
Doug Scribner. I started Watch My Bit, which is the first video platform in Bitcoin combined, so artists can earn money and split it to their whole team. We had a focus on bands in particular. I'm a musician in the old days. I was paid to play circuit in Hollywood. I've been an investor and owner of Bitcoin since 2011.
Wow.
So I'm now an investor in other projects.
Cool.
Ari Luttrapor, CEO of Jalapeno Inventive, looking at connecting users' online experiences with the use of crypto and crypto assets.
Great.
I've been in the space for about 3.5 years, almost 4 years, so pretty decent technological understanding of it. I was a CS major back in the day before I got to college. But
Yeah.
I'm Jeff D'Agostino, musician, artist, but also got involved in Bitcoin early on in 2010, started mining with some friends. Brock Pierce is an old friend of mine, so he introduced me to the technology. But actually, I followed the cypherpunk movement before that. So I'm not a tech guy, but I've been pulled into the space. And now, because I worked in the music industry as an artist, I was signed by Jimmy Iovine at Interscope Records, and a friend of mine is starting a publishing company with Randy Jackson. They're coming to me saying, what's up with this blockchain technology? Can you help us connect with people that can help us build blockchains for publishing companies and this and that? Yeah. So that's why I'm here. Also, my girlfriend produces a show with Jesse Ventura.
Cool.
So she's here as well.
Stephen Huntsman. I'm originally from Austin, Texas, but living in LA, and recovering talent agent, producing, and a philanthropic startup, and curious, like, system of it. Or
Is he here?
with,
Yeah.
and just was telling me to, you know, can learn more and get more into this. And that's some interesting things. Just need to learn more, so researching and people in this community
Great.
learn.
Thank you.
I'm Eric Johnson, amateur guitar player, investor, have a very deep understanding of Bitcoin and blockchain. I'm from Seattle. I also have a pretty good understanding of the entertainment business as well. So with that in mind.
Cool. That's great. That helps me. So I'm going to bounce around a little bit. So going on this idea, I had a cute little Ramones link today. My persona is this idea that if it's our goal to use blockchain to improve the viability of being a performing artist, a DJ, a musician, then we need to examine the context of the times that we're living in to see how we're doing, see what the problem is, because there's a lot of blockchain utopia that comes out, and it's great. It enchants people and it hypnotizes them in, but if the goals aren't clearly stated in the context of a problem solving a problem, it can become a marvelous technical marvel that isn't very useful. So this is an amazing inflection point in this space with tons of ICOs coming out left and right, and then some regulation and knock that down. In the middle, there's, we're finally getting to the point where the tools are ready for us to do stuff with them. So the idea that looking at what went wrong, that's kind of why I wanted to take this talk. So yeah, and like the idea is like, they're just like Bitcoin and blockchain and Nexus aren't going to get rid of venture capital, because there's always going to be a role for smart money, and money that's not just money, that's also like tons of seeing people epically fail and seeing what worked, and those are some really smart people that can drive the money. Same thing with the music industry. Like the blockchain is not gonna, it shouldn't and it won't get rid of the music industry. Like record labels have a function, a great one. Publishers have a great function. Publicists, there are more examples. Well, nothing is pure, or I'm not stating that as an empirical truth. There are just many cases where there's still great indie labels, especially, but major labels they're still trying to figure out how to make it work for themselves without going down completely. And this whole thing is a great litmus test, because when great labels use blockchain, it's my thesis, and this is also the .blockchain music thesis, that it's not it was the record label's problem and sort of fault many years ago, but today it's no longer. These people are being as scrappy as anyone else, and it's really Pandora, Spotify, YouTube and I'm not saying those companies are evil, it's just that their economics model isn't correct for this kind of industry, the same way that Uber is going to be replaced by a blockchain cooperative eventually. It's simple market economics. And Vinay Gupta has a great talk on this on Kosa's blockchain, or Kosa's Penguin, about how Linux broke the conventional corporation model. And open source communities have a really funny way of being actually able to make huge profits, but they have a different ethos. And the idea that we can have a spot, and this is what I was very happy to hear Colin say, that like where I'm thinking as a sort of third-party middleware going is where the Nexus platform is going to go. These are nodes that can host streaming. And if we have a CubeSat network around the globe and we have local terrestrial Earth mesh stations, we have a telecommunications network that can be cooperatively owned by all the musicians and all the publishers in a way that's up to them. So that's my spiel. But to get there, we need this my persona. So that's the idea that, everything in a system. Oh, this is where I was going to say that the idea of the rocket ship is a great metaphor, because rocket science is some of the hardest science, and it comes down to every piece being in perfect alignment. And in order for a touring band to make it, the same holds true. It's like a very perfect system of almost like a human body's health. And if you suddenly lose 30% of your revenue in the middle of that, that's like your blood pressure going through the roof or your cholesterol suddenly spiking. And it can be a number of things, but it's often a symptom of a larger issue. So YouTube's revenue model being a black box where you don't know the algorithms choosing, so one day you could be a YouTube celebrity and maybe you're a great musician too, and that's how you fund it. If your revenue's variable and nothing changes on the optics side or the impressions, that's not sustainable. And so the blockchain gives us the idea of being able to see the black boxes, unearth them, find the systems that are not serving us as artists, and then cooperatively join up, because we have such a huge purchasing power when we work together. So this is where we learned from Rock and Renew. Part of Rock and Renew was working with Billy Parrish. This is in 2004, I think, doing the Campus Climate Challenge, which was like 180 colleges putting their books together and saying, we're going to change how we buy stuff, because we have billions of dollars of collective purchasing power as a group. So if all of the labels and all the artists and all the publishers, and we can create a hybrid cooperative model. I'm not suggesting a one-size-fits-all or a utopian authoritarian model. Like, this will be many models, but it does work, because we saw like millions, if not billions of dollars of change by these, and it was college students who drove this. They like wrote petitions to change the budget, and artists and their fans imagine the collective purchasing power and authority, but in order to get that authority, we need our identities to be made basically into whole parts. So the idea of like AI automation services, and I'll put these online, but the idea is that think about your persona and think about the services that artists are using today to make it, or even if they've already made it, the services by which they depend to reach their fans. So if we go further into this model, the idea that these YouTube and Pandora and Spotify, their impression of you, their database impression of who you are, has very little to do with what you want or your agency. So if you're a huge artist and you have all these fans and loads of data, metadata being collected on where they live, where they streamed from, how long they streamed, all the cache information, where they were before and after. Think about how priceless that would be if you get a ping from your AI tour manager robot saying, hey, I noticed this trend that this band is always on before you and this band's on over after you, and you guys, your touring seems to link up in these places. Why don't you guys co-op market together and tour together? Like, this is what labels already do, but they do it somewhat blind. And Spotify has the nerve, after a pretty bad impression of their payout model, to say, okay, we'll free up some of the streaming metadata and we'll sell it back to the artist at a low rate. and there were certain financial metrics. Well, whose data really is that? And certainly if it's only rebuilding the backbone of Spotify, that we thank Spotify for their service. They've done a great thing. Pandora, I'm not knocking these. These things helped me a lot, and they help a lot of artists, and they will continue to, but their economics model needs to change if they want to stay competitive. They don't own, they're putting a innovation tax on basically what's a bundling of open source technologies, because we've already seen people build on Blockstack and will build on Nexus and Ethereum, different streaming opportunities that just take back the syndication rights and make it so that it's clean, so that the relationship between the artists and their fans and the marketers, and it's not this huge 30 to 50% chunk taken out and then your variable chunk given to you with blindness on the rules, so that it's hard to plan a business around, where you have major projects just like folding, or the founder of, I think it's Kickstarter, going on this tour with his wife and their band and opening up the books about like the fact that they really didn't make any money, even though they, and I know a lot of pretty well-known bands that have the same situation. They eventually make money, by the grace of God and squeezing rocks from the thousand nets. But the thesis is that these things open up much bigger opportunities for artists to have their agency. So Nexus delivering the blockchain via the telecommunications nodes and cube satellites, that's a thing. And the idea of the to-the-moon dynamics that we see all over crypto, well, already we've seen some people put together like, well, what if each, and Tatiana is here with Tatiana Coin is a great example, way ahead of its time, of how about a coin for the artist. So I'm a big proponent of the dot blockchain music model for this. And for those of you not familiar with it, it's Benji Rogers, who is the founder of Pledge Music, which is kind of like the Kickstarter for bands. And they're like a huge company now that's like $20 to $40 million company that has done a lot of stuff for 8 some odd years, helping bands, do Kickstarter type funding for their projects. Well, Benji got obsessed with blockchain like a lot of us, and the dot blockchain music model, I didn't bring the slide, but I'll draw it. It's a graph where they're introducing a new file type. So it's the .bc file type in the middle, and this is your metadata. This is all the artist information, their name, who wrote the songs, who's the publisher, what are the splits, if they made a deal with the guitar player, who gets paid. Now, this is a great sort of Linux foundation approach to the kernel. This is one way of thinking about it, and they're not selling a coin, and they're not doing an ICO. Just like Nexus, they are building stuff that has validity, whether you decide to work with it or not. But Benji did the smart thing of spending 2 years before really making this very public, going to every major label and every publisher, and they didn't go to first was Spotify, Pandora, and the streaming services, because this is going to disrupt their model. And the idea is that you have your metadata, then you have around the thing, you have your stakeholders, and they live in different places on this kind of three-dimensional graph. So this is the publisher, and this is the label, and you got the writer here, and in the metadata, which goes here, is this set of splits, the agreements. And then inside here is how music gets handed out to people, how they stream it, and you have the payment agreements and all the licensing terms, and they're revocable. And with Nexus, contracts can even become reversible or refundable. So the idea is that we can take all that information. Right now we have Grace Notes, which is an elaborate, cruel exercise in non-interoperability. You enter a lot of data, it comes up maybe on a CD, but what do you do with it? And then that data, when it goes to Pandora, they import it into their own database because they have a distinct impression of you as an artist or a label or an investor or whoever you are that's different than yours. And in this model, the impression of you is from you. And you have to actually prove things that are real. So if you say you own this song 50% and your splits are this, but you don't, all you're doing when you publish it to the blockchain is publicly admitting you're a fraud. And certainly in order to get the movie rights assigned to the track for Beyonce, it's not going to be enough to say, hey, I'm Beyonce. Like identity and that, hey, my persona is the idea that the first step is identifying ourselves to a degree that's provable. So projects like OneName and Blockstack and their namespace and the .eth namespace and Civic, good one, and Uport, these are all identity management tools. And I'm not recommending a single one. And I think the dot blockchain model is the right model, which is all of them are good. And the more you have, the less risk you present that you're you. So if what's at stake is, all right, we're about to close this deal and I need the sync licensing wallet address, if I'm communicating with you, I'm going to check that identity hash against lots of reference points. And this is another area where my role, I think, in this whole universal picture with the Sense Collective is to bring agents together. So Nexus and dot blockchain make a perfect pairing in this regard because Nexus has this time dynamic, which is another way to prove identity with proof of stake. So the longer you're participating and dedicating your time and resources to something, the less likely it is you're a spammer or a fake. And then it's about a multiplicity of identities. So like so when I teach this at NYU ITP in the summer camp, the best thing for anyone at any blockchain level of understanding is to register themselves on one name.
Now, can you define registering? Because I mean, are you giving a government license or just a name and an address or a Bitcoin address?
All of the above. And there, just like with many things in the space, there is no one way. There is no authority. It's going to be a gradual state of consensus by gatekeepers. And this is where the gatekeepers maintain their relevance.
Gatekeepers, you mean PROs and
Yes.
publishing companies?
Yes.
Attorneys who represent estates.
Right, because this is an additional thing. We still have and need those agencies, ASCAP and BMI and Harry Fox and for a while. And certainly it's up to those agents to get with this, which I see that they're doing. I don't know which one's ahead of which, or if there is that state yet, but I know that's part of what I think made Blockchain's solution so elegant, because they're not trying to sell anything yet. They're privately funded. They will have some coin dynamics. I think it will probably end up being a little bit like Filecoin. Not quite sure. I think it's going to be more like Red Hat, where, because this doesn't cost you any money except for what the blockchain you're doing it on charges you. And you could do it on any blockchain. And the degree to which you get help, I think, is how Blockchain will probably make their money. You know, they're like Red Hat. The software is free, but getting help with it is extra.
I have some .bc questions here.
Please.
I'm not a technical guy, but I met Benji and been in the space for a while. So now, so like an MP3 is just a music file. Would the .blockchain file be embedded into that MP3, or is it the other way around? It's a .blockchain file which contains the media and all of the PRO information, the splits, everything else, and here's the music file and the video file also.
Well, first let me preface my answer by saying I don't work for Blockchain Music, and I don't have any affiliation with them other than being an evangelist, a friend. And you know, when the software is right, like I'm playing around with it now for the Sense Collective, and I'm helping a few big artists and my brother to play with Benji's call, his general call. Like, hey, we need help, register stuff, tell us what this is like. So just to state that. So this is my take on to answer it. So it's a new codec. So instead of MP3, it replaces it. It's in the encoding part, and this is where the true crux of it is. It depends on being done in the studio before any non-encoded track of that type gets out there. And this is why it will only, certainly in the beginning, it will only work for forward-facing compositions that haven't been released or out in the world. Because if you have a copy that doesn't have the metadata and one that does, which do you think is going to be? Yeah. Now, this is not, what's that locked file type for the, you know, that they tried for a while with iTunes, and you know what I'm talking about? It's the MPEG-4, but it's like the one that's like, it's locked, and a lot of people didn't like that. Yeah, you know, we'll figure it out, but it's not quite like that. It's more, you don't have to do this, but there can be, if this becomes the standard, then it's your loss not to do it. What will and should happen is that if enough artists, because this is, I mean, what's the downside of this? There really is no downside, because MP3 is a pretty terrible codec anyway. It's not that great. You're like, you know, so yeah, so but on the studio side, if that's what every artist does, think about if artists put their foot down like they've done with some of the streaming services. Benji's run the numbers, and I don't remember them off the top of my head, but like it's millions in the 20 to 100 category of revenue that just immediately comes like off the table, that's been left on the table because of just one use case alone. YouTube's, like, it's all of these companies, Pandora, Spotify, and they follow the same market sort of exploitation that an Uber does, where it's arm's length risk. They don't share the risk with the producer. They get a huge share of the gain. And if someone's uploading unlicensed stuff or copyright, pirated stuff, they shrug their shoulders and they say, how could we possibly keep track of everything? Send us a takedown notice and we'll take it down. So on their most recent, technical meeting, they were talking about I think it was nearing 1 trillion total number of title compositions on stream, not on the number of titles, on the number of streams. Imagine how much physical monitoring you have to do to see if there's something wrong to take down. I mean, it's such a bloated way to do it. If
the examples, of course, you're shooting your kid's birthday party and the neighbor next door is playing a pool party and the Rolling Stones is playing.
Right.
All of a sudden you get a takedown notice because their filter is flagged. You don't have the rights to play Jumpin' Jack Flash.
And it's because fractional or variable license rates are not possible in the current model, or if they're possible, they're certainly not feasible. And in this new model, and certainly this is where Nexus and blockchain become like a beautiful little pair of lovers, where it's like, because they're time-based, refundable, and you can end a contract, and you could say, if this is in your wedding video, you're going to pay to make the wedding video, give us 1% of what you pay, and it's like almost on the honor system with a minimum of like $1 or something. It's like, my wife is a great painter, and she's an abstract painter, and we laugh about how people complain about the cost of the frame, and they end up spending more on the frame than they want to spend on the artwork. Well, this is a similar model. It's like, this method is not meant to be the Metallica suing a 13-year-old or whatever. This is like a proportional thing. If you're using it on a wedding thing and you're spending money on the wedding, give us a tiny bit of that because the artist worked hard and it's going to make your video better. But not a huge, and this can be up to the artist. And a lot of artists will still end up doing the same thing. You can use it for free because now you've made a fan forever.
You break it down. If someone's using the blockchain codec, and they say, I want to use a Taylor Swift video on my stupid little home video, or my sketch comedy thing. And you could do that. Now the codec would automatically say, oh, I see you using this Taylor Swift video, here's the splits. So all the advertising revenue that would come in goes to her, and you're okay with that because you got to use a Taylor Swift song in your video.
I'm high-fiving you right now. Right. Yeah, it's exactly it. And one level above in abstraction is DJ remixes. Like, there are so many remixes that are becoming such a viable and awesome art form where it's hard to do licensing splits on that because, okay, well, I got the stems from this and the, this bit from this. So the artists can decide themselves how to price that, and they can do it as a community. And this is where communities kind of helping each other. And this is where it because what I was saying with the physical body metaphor, it really does sometimes all come down to that extra $2,000 in the year. And I remember really reconsidering my entire life when I was making, $2,000 a month, $4,000 a month, $8,000 a month in music publishing. And that was a good enough, with my lecturing and consulting to live off of. Then the 1 month when I was expecting a $6,000 check and I got $2, that was the first warning bell, because it was that was 9 months ago. All the movies weren't on Showtime and cinema, for whatever reason, hard to peg down, bad for business planning. So this opens up the buckets, and for a lot of artists, it's just going to be a little bit more. But for some artists, it's going to be a lot more. And for the whole industry, it allows for real dynamic webs where artists can help each other, which they've always done. And this is where the technical stuff is the lower level library and different projects. Usability is key. So I'm kind of going to run around for the next 6 months or a year trying to bring different people into the Sense Collective, which is based in New York, but we have presence in LA and in Seattle and England and all over the world, in London and a few different cities. And really, it's a decentralized hub. So it's the same. We dog food. We're trying to. So on Saturday we have a music contest. I want to open up to questions and chat. Saturday is in that tent that you saw, in between, the clear one, where they were having breakfast, I think. We're going to have, record music. I'm going to show people how to embed some identity, and we'll put some Nexus wallets up with tracks. People are going to be playing all day. And really the point is just to open this up to get bands into our community, because I think they are the future, man. They gain the most, and they have the hugest platform, you know?
And they're the hardest ones to persuade and
Right, it has to be like, yeah.
You know, dealing with actors and musicians and technology is tough sometimes because they're a little flaky. Because they're artists and they're musicians and they're actors.
That's why the open source method is great. It's like, do what you will, and there's a bounty for that, and there's grants, but it's work-based, and if you drop the ball, okay, and it's reputational too, so, you know.
And so what I'm seeing is, I mean, you've got this protocol that you could have all of this music, or you know, you can call it intellectual property, just to expand, you know, what we're talking about, if it's user music or poetry, whatever. And you can have this access to it through this .bc, and then that whole application layer, what are all the different ways you can utilize this medium, and then all the different ways that those can generate revenue, and it's all you know, that's
Yes.
So it's making me think of like the Chrome store, since so many of the either free or very, very low cost applications, and these are all the resources that you can use, and that it's instant, you know, revenue stream for the artists.
Right. And there's a thing where artists, like the way that they become sort of alive in the system is by specification. So there's this thing that we built for the Sense Collective called the Eco Blockchain, which has a specification engine. So all this stuff here is user-generated identity. And identity is the aggregate of all your stuff. Like, so when you go to, you know, think about your, you know, different social media platforms over the year. I'm going to, you know, show my age by the fact that I was like a MySpace champion. You know, like we knew like Chris, the technical founder's wife somehow, our bass player knew them. We were on MySpace all the time. It helped our career so much. But when Facebook came out, we had to port our entire identity and start over. And it's the same for Uber and Airbnb and all these things. You might have a 5-star rating in Airbnb. If you want to do home away, your reputation is zilch, and you have to start all over. So the idea of owning your identity, this is what identity looks like to us in the Sense Collective, and this works on top of Nexus and .bc. Everything that you do online is a piece of your identity, and it all gets compressed down, and that gets hashed. The same way that all the metadata for a song gets compressed down, and that gets hashed. So who you are is up to you, and this is very congruent with Nexus's approach to identity. Also, Vinay Gupta's, you have multiple identities. You have tons of different wallets. You're never in a position for an Equifax hack, because that identity is the one that's guarded like Fort Knox with cryptographic keys like beyond, with the 3 different types of, you know, cryptography in Nexus, and forget about it. But your, you know, YouTube, yeah, and it's voluntary. But your YouTube identity and the one that you want to take with you across YouTube, Spotify, all of the streaming, that's one here where you compress that down, and now you have the ability to, and anybody can do this. So there's identity matching. So the idea that you have a specification engine and your fan has a specification engine looks like this. It's just like Twitter hashtags. So you tag things with @ and, you know, the hash symbol to give, so you can come back to them. So when you're checking out your data about your YouTube plays and you find some trends, you stick a hashtag on that so you can find the Boise, Idaho data for this song, and then on Nexus, you have different identities that you can set up, and it's like your virtual touring agent that's able, and then when you're able to do this within a CubeSat network, and you got AI running, you can have, say, hey, AI tour manager, whose only interest is my best interest, tell me when great cross sections are happening. Tell me those things like, oh, that band just, you guys literally passed each other on Highway 10, like, you know, the 3rd time, and you're trending in the same songs and you don't know each other. So it's the idea that we don't get to that without this. So and this is kind of a nice middle way in. And our goal for the next 6 months is to just begin playing with people starting here. So Saturday, I'm going to have up a little specification thing, and like it works just like Gmail or Evernote, you know, where you tag shit in a way that makes sense to you.
Are you actually talking about recording songs and stuff, and then compressing it and then putting it through an algorithm, including the metadata?
I've been talking about taking that ability, which is something that .blockchain introduces, and then taking the concept of metadata and making it yours across all systems with the master repository, you. And so that for the first time for a lot of people, this will be their first AI who's searching not to sell ads on them to Facebook, but searching for your agency based on what you told them you wanted through the specification of shit. So it's the tagging.
Do you have something that's going to do this?
Yeah, in the blockchain. This will be using something like TensorFlow. This is an AI that it is a derivative of TensorFlow. It's a Linux OS. So our solution does this on a little Raspberry Pi. But this is not unique to the Sense Collective. This is where Golem and SOM and all the projects that are dealing with like distributed computation on a little lower level. And this is what Nexus is also doing. Like the real magic is in the hardware, the virtual machines of these crypto tokens. That's what allows us.
This is a public blockchain, right? This is a key point.
It can be, but the determination of whether it's public or private or federated or totally, you know, decentralized, those are decisions to
guarantee the blockchain is immutable.
Only by the group you decide is the we. Like there are some blockchains that we've seen called back, like with Ethereum, like, you know, by committee. So my proposal is not to affect that. That's a space above and below where we're trying to live. Based on what's popular right now is some of these blockchains are immutable, you know, but that you can have an immutable blockchain where you can still refund or a transaction. That's what Nexus is building. It's going to be up to the group.
Yeah, we are going to have to establish these digital identities.
Uh-huh.
But you don't want someone else to be able to change our identity.
Right. No, that's
Blockchain be immutable,
that's a great point, and it's absolutely the basis of all of the successful blockchains, that level of immutability is built into the framework, but more importantly, that we don't give autonomy and authority to any system where you can steal an identity easily. We make that impossible or cryptographically as difficult as possible by way of things like how much can you prove it? How many identities? Like if you're trying to steal my identity or rob me of my music catalog, you're going to need massive physical paper documents and KYC, and we're never, you know, the way to solve this so that it doesn't end badly is for these big groups who are going to make this the next publishing or whatever system to build that in. That we need lots of trust, and Nexus has that in their solution with their proof of stake and time based. So we'll have like proxies and oracles who also help, because I don't think this should happen overnight. I don't think it will happen overnight. So having like trusted agents who we already trust for things like that, they're great to like kind of help us gradually transition, you know? Any other questions?
Yeah, so with Sense Collective, and I'm looking at this from an artist standpoint, because I have a new record that I've funded on my own, and I'm looking at all different ways to release it, right? And if I wanted to utilize this technology, essentially if I'm coming to Sense Collective saying, hey, I want to secure the identity, that's a starting point for the data, and then utilizing different platforms like .blockchain, Nexus, to then put that data on?
Yeah, and what this would do, it would put you early in this mix in terms of being there very close to first in this crop of doing it this way. It's not going to completely solve the problem overnight, but you will be ready and I think garner a lot of just attention for doing it, and just like Tatiana has done with just being early to that game without the metadata side. And then as it comes online, you'll be in the in the early group, which is what they're trying to do. It needs the Spotifys and the Pandoras, and some group where we can make money off of this better accounting has to be involved in some way, you know?
So here's a problem. I know it's a problem, maybe it's been solved already. So say, for example, in a blockchain, that blockchain identity and splits and kernel, and here's my agent, here's my attorney, here's my drummer, and here's all the splits, and we all put in our Bitcoin addresses for payment, for example. Can you change that? Like if that blockchain file is out there in the world, okay, is there like a portal where it's like, okay, this Bitcoin address is no longer valid because the singer died, now it needs to go to what his estate, his heirs.
Right. So it's immutable, but that doesn't mean that we can't continuously change and update it. It just records that change.
Right, okay.
And we can also encode something like a smart contract, which embeds a logic, you know, an if this, then that. And you can set up contingency logics and have custodians, which I think is a smart move, like Leica, which is a project that I love that we work with. They have some old-fashioned ways to work within the space. We're like, because some people are going to lose their keys and some people aren't purists with that element of it. You know? Right, exactly.
Use our platform to make money, but you need a Bitcoin wallet. Oh, okay, I gotta go.
Right. How many artists have lost the receipt to some amp or something that like they then were screwed on because they couldn't find it?
They crash their phone, or they go swimming with their phone, and all of a sudden, you know, they didn't back it up, and now,
Right.
now their fans are watching their video, they're getting paid to an address they no longer control.
Yeah.
It's like, you're killing me here.
Great point.
Right. So there's got to be some, I mean, a portal, and then that comes to identity. How do I know you're the artist that can make the change to your payout splits?
It's going to be a proof of identity concept that I think follows Vinay Gupta's, which is the best one I've seen so far, which is an insurance-based model where it's all based on how much is at risk. No. Vinay Gupta works from Consensus, and he has Hexayurt Venture Capital, and he's just an amazing speaker. You should watch his YouTube videos. And he has one thing that's like all about identity management, and Vinay Gupta, and it's he was one of the founders of Ethereum. He helped launch Ethereum, and he's an early cypherpunk dude who was into like gold, digital gold, and yeah, he's great. And he was one of the inventors of VR, along with Jaron Lanier, or he was in that group. And anyway, he has a model that's like the degree at which is at stake, and Benji follows this to a T. It's like you have to prove yourself through multiple places, including the existing key holder to that world, which is ASCAP BMI, you know, your publishing company. In order to collect money, any money, you have to have registered. So it's not going to be easy.
That needs to be disintermediated. ASCAP and BMI are pirates. I hope no one's in that performance rights thing, but Tatiana will give you an earful about them too.
Hey, you know,
they came after us because we're a startup, we're trying to get artists on board. You need a license from us. It's like, well, we're not using any of your artists' songs. I know, but you might someday. And our license will protect you. It's like, how much is it again?
Yeah, those are models ripe for disruption, and I think those companies there are some upsides, but there definitely are some epic poisonous downsides, and they have to get right with where this is headed. And
do you know if blockchain has made inroads with that?
Oh yeah, they would have to. They absolutely would have to. This can't work without them because it still represents 90% of the way that music is the payment on music is still collected by them, whether you know that's good or bad. I've had good experiences with ASCAP. My brothers had terrible ones with BMI. I know other opposite stories, but I also know my dad got a patient who works at BMI who said they're working on it, and I know that they should be. I mean, they should be. Yeah, exactly. On the behalf of the artist, and right. It's like doing their job.
If I hire BMI, which is now which is what you do, right? You kind of.
Well, you engage them. They're like a union. You know, they're an artist representative.
Right, but I want them to handle my split, so to speak.
Right.
They can put their metadata in, and they get their split for the service they're providing you. But if I don't want to use them, I want to be a self-publisher, for example. I'll take care of the splits. I can do that too, right?
No, you still need to register with one of two in America.
Must disrupt.
Right, and this is where we will see disruption. I don't know what it'll look like, but I think it's inevitable. What time is this thing till? Do you know? Hey, buddy.
How far away do you think the MP3s are being replaced by a better technology or some better quality?
I'd say
This will disrupt that.
I would say on the like aggressively optimistic side, like 5 years, 4 or 5 years, and at the tail end, no more than like 8 to 10 years. And I think that it's absolutely going to happen. I don't know if it'll exactly flow this way, but it will be close, and it's definitely going to go there. Just because the money, it's like a game of backgammon where you know you've already won. Like, it's mathematical. It's just the kinks need to be worked out. And that's where it's fun to watch new tokens come out and try and do this. And I wish them all well. I think that it's great to see people succeed and fail. I hope that when they fail, it doesn't hurt too much. And I like the model where, you know, they don't get killed because of that, by stress, you know, because we need epic failure to get there. It's all like bug bounties. And I recommend for some of these companies, you don't always need to launch a coin, like in the first bit. There's so much grant money in the form of venture capital by like Blockstack's 50 million and Ethereum's 50. There's like $100+ million of venture capital right now just from protocols. And Nexus has its, you know, ambassador program. Like, go to a stack that already works and figure out how to do the music thing within that environment, and then maybe make your coin, you know? Yeah, exactly.
What was the name of this?
.blockchain music, and it's a .bc file.
.bc, right, okay.
And it's really cool because the GitHub has like a way that you can bring in metadata and then, you know, pull in the sort of or already used Grace Notes kind of template. And
Notes is like an industry sort of signing up for, here's my new song.
yes, and it's how, you know, and anyone can use Grace Notes. It's how you get your titles onto the CD. You know, like before Grace Notes, you put the CD and it comes up as untitled, you know. After Grace Notes, you actually go to the website and you do it on the CD, but then you go to the website and you sync it up and it creates the registry. But then that registry is not used by Pandora, Spotify, or YouTube. They have their own database. So the idea is we take Grace Notes, you know, and just make it modern, and then we serve up only one option for these streaming companies. They don't have their alternative. This is how my song exists. It's the only way it exists, so here.
Buried within the file itself,
Yeah.
that you can extract and, you know how to distribute funds.
Is this also a replacement for something like CD Baby?
No, CD Baby's working with them, and this is absolutely gonna, because these middle agents, gatekeepers, and old school things that have worked still work. And within a better business model where all this money's coming off the table, even some of the ones that have been less than awesome might get awesome again. Because a lot of, you know, at some point, even if they were doing business in a bit of a sharky way, like, I don't know what the record industry was like. I watched the show Vinyl, you know, but like, I don't know exactly. I hear stories. But that's beside the point. If they're making artists a lot of money and they're representing the fans in a way that's good, you know, take or leave I would love for them to behave awesomely, but let's give the table a new, let's reset the table and make it so that these companies have one choice in terms of like agency, so that there isn't a real chance to be a sleazoid, you know, because if you act sleazily in your accounting practices, again, you're just publishing that you steal or double book or whatever. You know, like, look up the record industry concept of breakage and payola about, like, you know, how they would charge artists for broken records, even into the CD age, you know, and this is like ripe with graft and corruption. So, like many things, blockchain shines a light through digital trust, which is pretty awesome. So Sense Collective has a website, thankfully, sensecollective.org, and I think you could do email capture, and my email is just Jonny, Jonny, at sensecollective.org, or rockandrenew.com. And Sense Collective is like the cool website that we're actually proud of. Jonny at ROCK, or no, at sensecollective.org is the best one. And I'll be around. And Saturday, come by the tent and I can show you. I'll run the .blockchain in the GitHub and run like Nexus and run like the Blockstack DApp environment to just kind of, that's what I'm going to do on Saturday for 4 hours from like, I think 10:30 on.
And this is utilizing like a .bc file?
Yes.
And then that is streamed from that point?
Yeah, I mean, streaming we can do demonstrate clunkily, you know? certainly all the elements. And tonight I'm playing with Tatiana, so we'll have a drink at the club.